let's take a brief look how the time track works. So the time track consists of 11 spaces and there are extra +1 +2 spaces for late evening activations. And there are 10 spaces for activations, which means there are going to be at least 10 activations each day. After each activation, the time token goes up by 1. And every time space has its own hour, is just for immersion of gameplay. So we go from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. So there are classes of activations, and some activations advance time and some not. Bigger classes of activations affect more time on the time track, meaning, for example, this activation is the general activation of the whole front, has a little arrow on the left upper corner, which means time will be advanced after this activation, and the little 4 means that this activation will go 4 spaces further on the time track, and then the time track advances. For example, this one will go 3 spaces and the time will be advanced. So it will go like this and time will be advanced. This one will advance time, but it won't go before further on time track. And there will be really small activation which won't advance time at all. For example, commander intervention like Hepner, the arrow is crossed, which means activations will go on the same time track and the time will not advance. What is going on with those counters that go before the time track? Well, this is called conflicting orders. And in procedures, in almost every procedure, you will find conflicting orders. Conflicting orders, C, conflicting orders, B, conflicting orders, and confusion. This is supposed to create situation and the feel when orders don't really end, let's say, at 5 a.m. So if the army gets its orders at 5 a.m., but they last for many hours. So those activities are still going on. For example, in this case, until 1 p.m. And those cheats will affect units and armies that should be activated again before time reaches this activation. So conflicting orders has actually two main effects. The first one is what can you find, and this can you find in procedures quick reference, is reduce HQ range. So conflicting orders for armies with turned HQ or movement combat. Movement combat means that movement combat always affects all armies because this is the whole front activation. And in case of turned HQ, this means that if you get smaller activation, like for example 1 army activation for Polish side, or mentioned Heeresgruppe Nord, which means this is also 1 army activation. For example, if with this cheat I activate 10th army, I will turn this army 90 degrees, which will indicate that this army was used with this cheat. It will go 3 up and then time goes 1. And if, for example, general activation comes, it will mean that only this army will be affected by conflicting orders. So main 2 effects of conflicting orders are, first, as mentioned, reduced HQ ranges. And if we check the main procedure book, where this is explained a little more, reduce current range of HQ, each space of difference between the current time, including the space where the affecting token is positioned, and one of above tokens further to the right of the time track. Reduce the range of the HQ by 1. So if general activation was on 5 a.m. and then this one goes 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then time advances. If we pulled Heeresgruppe Nord activation, 10th Army should be activated by Heeresgruppe Süd, but there it is. If I pulled Heeresgruppe Süd and want to activate 10th Army, the 10th Army HQ range will be reduced by 1, 2, 3. By 3. So this range will be only 9 at the moment of activation. If it was activated on 11, for example, its range will be limited only by 1. So it will be 11 instead of 12. Now, what does, so this is one thing. This is one thing. The second one regards movement and combat. Starting with combat, if we check the tables and dice roll modifiers, we have right here the modifier of conflicting orders. This means that not only ranges in conflicting orders are limited, but also you get as much of DRM as the conflicting order value is. So again, for example, if there was a general move activation at 5 a.m. and then I want to activate 10th Army, then the dice roll modifier in every combat that this army will fight, units of this army will fight, will be -3 because of the same 1, 2, 3. The second one, the second problem is with movement. Again, if we look at first shortened procedures, there's D5, so this is 1A D5 and this is confusion. And in case of confusion, unit which is out of command in the moment of activation, and state of out of command doesn't change during the activation. So if unit starts out of command, it's gonna stay out of command for the duration of the activation. So let's invert this. For example, it's 9, and there was general Polish activation 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we advanced time, and then there is one army activation, which will affect all of the activations. And I want to activate Army Prusy. Army Prusy HQ will have range reduced by 3. 1, 2, 3. So it's gonna be 3. So this unit will start out of command. What does it do for movement? This is called confusion, and unit out of command will not always move as intended. In case you're going to want to move this unit, you're gonna have to check if the unit moves as intended. So for example, if I want to go this way to this hex, you have to make 1d6 roll, and 3 to 4 is going to be this hex. If not, left hex is going to be 1 to 2, and 5 to 6 is going to be right hex. Also, if unit moves not as intended, and for example, or it hits enemy unit, or it gets into zone of control of enemy unit, what then occurs is meeting engagement. It's right here. And meeting engagement is simply one die roll in the table of meeting engagement, and you don't take into account any terrain or strength ratio, all you take into account is what unit was met. And there's infantry, cavalry, panzer unit. If you meet panzer unit, it's gonna end probably bad. So, as I said, some counters don't go, some activation cheats don't go further, like corpse activations, meaning those are small activations that are really, and this is actually in this game strength of motorized corps, German motorized corps. So they don't affect further activations of the corps, of course. But also, those activations can be postponed. So if we look quick in the quick reference, motorized corps decide to activate immediately or postpone. This activation can be postponed, so kept in hand for later. For example, if there was not uncomfortable situation to activate corps, you can postpone the activation and wait until conflicting orders are over, and then announce that you're going to play from hand corps activation. So let's make a little simulation now, little example of play. How would one full day of activations go? Time is 5 a.m. So first activation in German initiative is picked by German player, and it can be any activation. Also in Polish initiative, Polish player can pick coordination cheat. And in case of no initiative, the first cheat is always random. So, and there's important decision for German player, because what cheat is going to be picked, it may really heavily affect what is going to be happening in the first hours of the day. So, for example, German player picked activation, let's say Luftwaffe raids. So the first activation of the day is going to be Luftwaffe raids, which doesn't affect anything and advances the time. 7 a.m. and the second one is already random. Second one is 19 Corps. It takes activation, nothing to be affected, and we advance time. It's 9. Next one is logistics check. As mentioned in sequence of play, if logistics check doesn't occur during the day, then it's going to be automatically checked in the night. So logistics, as you can see, has arrow crossed, so it doesn't advance time. So we stay at 9 a.m. On 9 a.m. there's German Southern Army Group activation. So if we have 10th Army, let's say 10th Army was activated. So 10th Army will be subject of conflicting orders after activation until 3 p.m. 3 because there's a 3 on a cheat, and we advance time. 11. On 11 we have Polish answer to German actions, and this is actually cheat that can be postponed as well as German corps. But there's one problem with this. As for two armies coordination, it can be postponed, but if played from hand, you need to check if it's going to be played or failed. If it's failed, it's gonna stay in your hand and can be used in another impulse. Also, if German and Polish player have postponed activations, German player always has the first decision to play his corpse before Polish can announce playing of coordination. Also, if coordination is failed to play before the end of the day, as an effect of command failure, Polish player will suffer a morale loss. So we activated Heresgruppe Sud. Now is Polish coordination, and let's say that the Polish player will postpone this activation. In this place, we pick another activation. It's still 11, and on 11 there's a Plan West activation or Polish One Army activation. In case of Plan West, you check what is current Plan West stage, and in this section, in the yellow section, you have there are listed mandatory actions that you have to make. For example, in case of retreat to the rivers, all units that can move are supposed to make maximum possible movement towards river lines. If Polish player decides that he doesn't want to do this, then he can always pick the second part, the other activation, which is One Army, but this will cause morale loss, in this case -3. If morale reaches 0 in case of postponing Plan West, or not using Plan West, it will go into panic side and potentially can lose the whole campaign for Polish player. So Polish player really wants to avoid the situation to avoid the situation where general staff goes into panic, and this is why it is very important for Polish player to keep morale high, but even more important for German player to try to keep the Polish morale on the lowest possible level. There's also coordination counteroffensive that will a little adjust those actions, but we're going to talk about this later. So let's say Polish picks, let's say this is morale of, no, let's say the Polish picks the Plan West and makes actions according to Plan West. And Plan West is the activation which activates all units, the whole front. And it has 4, meaning it goes 4 to the right, and then we advance to 1 p.m. So now, the Polish player, as the only player that has postponed activation, can announce that he's going to use his coordination, but situation is really not so good for any Polish activations, because the whole front is activated until 7 p.m. and will be affected by conflicting orders. So we pull from the cup, and the next one is Heeresgruppe Nord. Now, there are conflicting orders for 10th Army, but no conflicting orders for Heeresgruppe Nord. So let's say German player activates, let's say, 3rd Army. 1, 2, 3. Only 3rd Army will be affected by conflicting orders. And we advance time. So end of conflicting orders for Heeresgruppe Sud and the 10th Army. Now we can turn HQ back to indicate that it is not anymore affected. And we pull Polish Navy activation, which doesn't advance time. So Polish player makes at 5 p.m. Navy activation. We pull another one, and this is 16 Corps, the best corps in the 10th Army, and German player decides to postpone this and take this into hand. So we now have 2 postponed activations. Next, second raid, and in case of second raid of the day, only Warsaw and only Navy can be targets of Luftwaffe raids. And this creates really interesting situation, hypothetically, because it was right after the Polish Navy action, which potentially meant that the Polish ships left their bases and are already on the open sea and very vulnerable to German planes. And we advance time. 5 p.m. Note, all of postponed activations have to be played during the day. So if the time is advancing last spaces, players need to check if all of the activations are played. There's no way that some of those are going to be left aside. Of course, there's one exception. Polish coordination can fail to activate. So the next one is Polish General Staff activation, meaning one army. There are conflicting orders, meaning all of Polish headquarters have now ranges limited by 1. Also all fights are with DRM of -1. But it's not too bad for now. So let's say we activate Army Prusy with this activation. It has range of 5 right now. And after activation, we go 1, 2, 3 to 11 p.m. Conflicting orders for Polish armies and Third Army ends. And now, let's say Polish player decides to try to activate coordination. Let's say he rolls 2, so he fails, so coordination go back to his hand. We roll. German player doesn't want to activate his corps. And this is tragic news for Polish player because this is general move or combat. Let's say Polish player picks move. Actually, tragic and good. Tragic because coordination is going to be pretty useless, but good because move activation, general move activation, will give Polish player extra movements at night. This means that some orders were prepared and sent in the late afternoon, and some of those orders are going to be, if Polish player picks movement, some of those orders are going to be to be used and conducted in the night time. So Polish player makes his moves. This goes 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes to +1 at night, and this is why those spaces are there, because in case of, let's say, on 9, Polish player gets some activation, and now you know that even if this is basically on the night place, it affects with greater amount of DRMs and limitations for HQs. 9 p.m. So now this is interesting. Now Polish player has his own activation. Now two spaces are left, so those two activations have to be played. So German player first decides that he wants to use his corps activation. So the activation is done. And then Polish player needs to play his coordination. There is no other option. For example, if German player had also second corps in his hand, it would mean that Polish player, because German player decides first, Polish player would definitely lose opportunity to play coordination. And let's say Polish player tries to play coordination and he fails again, which means the last one will be from the cup, and this will be German general movement at the end of the day with clean, let's say, with clean commands without any conflicting orders. Normally this would mean that the second move combat will go to the cup, but in this case it doesn't really matter, because if this stays here, German player will get extra night movements, but it doesn't matter because this movement will go on the night space, so he will get these extra movements anyway, unless he picks combat. In this case, there won't be extra movements, but he picked, let's say, movement. So we go to the night, we end the day, we go to the sequence of play, to the sixth phase of sequence of play. And what will this mean in this configuration? It will mean that in night matches, German player as well as Polish player will have opportunity to move all of his infantry units one extra hex of movement without any losses. Plus, Polish player, because of failed command, will lose 1 morale point. So this is how the movement track works.